right, so we're here today with Chris Larsen. Chris, we were just talking a little bit about our life, our families, our businesses.
Yeah.
Where we live, what we'd like to do in our off hours and stuff like that. I think it's super interesting what you've built. Some of the things you do on your off hours. So, tell our audience just a little bit of background and kind of where you've been, what you've experienced, and then we're going to jump into business and the work and the play after that.
Yeah, no, we should have shot this live down on the Carolina coast in South Carolina last week, Joe. We were crossing paths down there. But so yeah, next level income. I've been investing in real estate for over 20 years now, over half my life. But that's not, I always said I wanted to be an investor, but I have two young boys. We're down in Asheville, North Carolina. And I started out as racing bicycles. So I was racing bicycles in college, and that's all I wanted to do. I wanted to be a professional cyclist. I started racing when I was 14 years old. I met my best friend that year at one of the first races I went to. And I was riding a few times a week. And I'm like, well, how many days a week do you train? He goes, I train every day. And he looked at me like I was an idiot. And I'm like, oh, okay. I was like, yeah, we should get together and ride. We became best friends. We meet every day after school. We live 10 miles apart. So we'd each ride 5 miles, meet on this bike path, the B&A canal or B&A trail in between Baltimore and Annapolis. And I mean, when you spend that much time with somebody suffering and, just talking, and during formative years, we built a tight bond, raced together. We're supposed to be college roommates. As I was racing in college, Chris, my friend, passed away from a massive brain hemorrhage in between my freshman and sophomore years, the year before he was coming into school. So that really was something that totally rocked my world. I was just turned 19 years old. I thought I wanted to be a professional cyclist. I raced another year. I quit, and I hit this point, and I was just like, totally didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I was an engineering student at Virginia Tech. I didn't have great grades after that year, after Chris died. I didn't really want to be an engineer. Now, what I've been doing for 6 years, cycling to become a professional cyclist, I decided not to do that. And it was during that time that I said, okay, I need to honor the life that I've been giving, honor Chris's life because he doesn't have it anymore. And I need to get the most out of every day. And I knew to do that, I needed financial freedom, financial independence. So that was really the start of why I got into investing and, ultimately built this vision for myself. And I talk about it in my book, which I'll share with you if you're listening today, how you can get a copy of it.
Well, damn, man, that was one of the strongest leadoffs I think I've ever had. I mean, normally I ask people to talk about either one of their favorite failures or one of the biggest setbacks that helped them propel themselves. And I mean, that hits home. That's strong, and we always say that life happens for you and not to you. But I mean, you've almost been, I mean, it's a tragic event, but you've almost been given this gift as a reminder for why to go out there and just do it every single day at such an early age too, right?
Yeah. And I think, we were talking before the show and just talking about setbacks and different things. And, it's hard, in life, we have kids, as we were talking, and you don't want them to feel that pain. You don't want them to have those setbacks. But I really think that, those failures earlier in life and those moments, they teach you things. And as I got older, and, people were like, well, why do you do this? Why do you do that? Why do you work so hard? Why do you, spend so many hours racing your bike? And, it didn't really dawn on me. It's just how I was. And I thought everybody kind of felt that way. And, I read a study, and it was children that lose parents. I actually lost my father at age 5 as well. And the study talked about children that lose parents at an early age. They go on to be more successful. And this is a correlated variable in this study. And as I thought about it, what kind of really dawned on me was, we're young, we think we're invincible, and you do whatever you want. Time is basically infinite. And it, as a math guy, I thought, okay, if time is infinite, the value of time is 0, right? If you divide something by infinity. So once you recognize that time is finite and you have a finite amount of time on this planet, the value of that time goes up exponentially. And that's what happened to me after Chris passed away. I thought, I can't let an opportunity pass me by. I can't not ask that girl out. I can't not go on that trip with friends. I can't not make money to be able to have that experience or, do something. And that's really, I think that's what, to me, is what investing is all about, is helping people get to the point where they can have the financial ability to live their best life. And I truly believe that, you know, I was listening to a podcast today on the way back home. It was Garrett Gunderson, and he was talking about, people say money's the root of all evil. And I think, you know, he was talking about how people, you know, people's behaviors and what they do with it, that's where the evil comes from. And money is just a tool. And he's talking about how money's a tool. And that's how I see it. It's a tool. And if it's used properly, people live their best lives. If you're not a good person, you have a bunch of money, you're probably going to not be a very good person, whether you have money or not have money.
So true. It's just magnifying the person that you already are.
That's a great way to put it. Magnify the person you already are. Yeah.
But I love that, that time as a gift piece, because, you know, we talk about financial freedom piece all the time. Like everyone's chasing and chasing and chasing, like trying to find financial freedom. But I talk about this all the time is you can't get 1 minute back. You can't get 5 minutes back. You can't get a day back. And I know that you had to have had financial setbacks in your life or you wouldn't be at this point, right? And
Absolutely.
You can always make money back, right? I've lost millions of dollars in the process of making millions of dollars, and you could always get that back. You can't get any time back. Yeah. And that's why it's such a gift.
Absolutely. And I was at dinner with a couple friends last night. One's a very prominent neurosurgeon, another executive in the medical device industry. And he was, the surgeon was telling me how he met this gentleman. I won't kind of say exactly where it is, you know, just to be respectful, but he was one of the first drug runners for marijuana into the country. This was down in kind of the southern part of the United States. And the guy gets set up after he'd kind of left this life. He gets set up by a former partner. He ends up spending 5 years in jail. He gets out. His former partners had gone, they'd stolen everything, all his cash from his house. He actually had gold coins from a shipwreck. They stole those. And he had $600 in his bank account, $600, gets out of jail after 5 years, has basically nothing to his name. So he calls American Express and says, hey, you know, my card's inactive. I want to reactivate it. And they're like, yeah, you haven't been active here for 5 years. They reactivate his card. So he's got a line of credit, takes the line of credit, takes a cash advance, buys a house. It was like, I think it was like $40,000, flips the house. In 6 months, he had $300,000. So my point in telling that story is that, you know, you can't buy time back. You can lose money, but once you learn the fundamentals of how to make money and do things, whether it's in real estate or business or elsewhere, you can recreate that over and over and over again if you do that. But you have to have the time.
So incredible. And you have, you know, such a diverse background. You have a biomedical degree. I mean, you've done all these different things, but it boils down to that concept that you just talked about. And so let's talk about next level. Let's talk about what you do today. Me and you do a lot of the similar type of things, teaching people how to create passive income, passive investment, to buy their time back. So what does that look like? What is next level?
Yeah. So again, you know, kind of talking about my story, Joe, what I tried to do is I tried to put together a blueprint. I love legacy blueprint, but same thing. I try to put together a blueprint for people so that they could shortcut the path that I took. So I started off 21, bought my first residential piece of property rental, single family rental, bought a bunch of different single family rentals. I was running those for 15 years. I didn't have a lot of money. My family were blue collar. My mom was an assistant teacher, not even a teacher. My stepfather was a contractor. I mean, I made more money my first year as a professional than both of them ever did combined when I was with my parents. But so I needed money. So I went out and I said, okay, how can I, like Robert Kiyosaki said, become accredited? I looked for sales careers because I was in sales since I was like 12 when I went door to door selling newspaper, wrapping paper, and I sold newspapers and a bunch of different stuff. But I was like, okay, if I can make $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year, I can save 50% of that. I can invest that. You know, I could do that for 10 years. I'd be financially independent. And my very simple plan was just pay off those properties that I had and have $10,000 a month coming in, you know, after expenses. Well, I got 15 years into that whole process. So started at 21, I was in my mid 30s and I'm like, this is not working. I was actually about 33 at the time. And I started moving into commercial real estate. Along the way, I did things like set up high cash value, overfunded cash value life insurance policies to use. And I moved from residential to commercial real estate. So what we do today, we focus on multifamily properties, apartments. We do some self-storage, mobile home parks. And we do syndications, we bring in investors. But what Next Level Income, if you go to the website, is all about, it's about providing the opportunity for financial independence through education and opportunities for investors. So that's what our podcast is about. Our book, you can get a free copy of our book. Just click on the book link on the website. I have coaching clients as well to do that, but it's all about giving investors the tools to become educated, ultimately getting to the point where they're making more money that they can invest and create that passive income as well.
I love that. We're going to get back to that. I want to take it back a second. I'm probably going to ask you maybe what seems to be an off the wall question, but I think it's so impactful for the parents out there, right? So you have a 9 and an 11-year-old son, right? As we're taping this, and you said at 12 years old, you got into sales. And this is really just an opinion question. And I'm curious to hear your opinion. What do you think drives in us, right? Is it innate? Like, is it our upbringing? Is it what motivated you at 12 years old to go out and start selling? And do you think your boys have that same inside of them?
Yeah. Oh man, that's a good question. That is a bit of a curveball. So me personally, it's interesting. I came home from college and I had a Zig Ziglar book. And I set it on the counter and my mom shook her head and I said, what? And she said, your dad read that same book. I remember him reading that same book. Now, remember, I'm in my 20s at this point. My father passed away over 15 years ago. So I think there's certainly a genetic component. There's nature, there's nurture. And what's interesting is my parents didn't really push me. They didn't really push me to go into a certain sport. They didn't push me to go get a job or make money, but they were passively supportive, if you will. So for instance, my stepfather, I'm like, hey, like I never wanted to work like a regular job. Like my friends would work and they'd make $5 or $10 an hour or whatever it was at the time. And they'd work 20 hours a week after school. And I'm like, that's stupid. Like you can go make more money. So I collected trash from the neighborhood. The wrapping paper I was selling, I got something in the mail. I don't know how I found out about it, or maybe it was something like with school. And, I'd go to sell wrapping paper, like door to door, and people are like, oh, like, is this a school fundraiser? And I'm like, no, it's not. I'm just selling it because like, I want to buy this or take this trip and they're like, I think they just thought, well, holidays are coming up. I'll buy wrapping paper from this kid. He seems like he's motivated to do something. But my parents didn't give me a lot, Joe. So I had to make money to go do it. My stepfather, he'd come back. He was a contractor around Annapolis. He'd, work on $1 million homes. And he's like, hey, this person needs like their leaves done or their lawn done. And he'd say, hey, my son can do it. And he'd drop me off over there on a Saturday morning. He'd pick me up Saturday afternoon. I'd come back Sunday, ride my bike back. And at the end of the day, he'd show up with his dump truck and we'd load all the leaves, all the clippings, everything. I'd blow everything off and I'd charge him $300. And, so I'd make $300, $400, $500 in a weekend, which was way more than my friends were making. Sure. And so again, but my parents never pushed me, but I always had, for whatever reason, that drive and that work ethic. And when I found cycling, it was the same thing. I'm like, okay, I need money to buy a new bike. And people are like, oh, I wish I had rich parents that could buy me these bikes. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, well, my parents don't buy me stuff. And I'm like, my parents don't buy me stuff either, So when it comes to my boys, my older son, Ethan, he's 11. He's got this tremendous drive inside him when it comes to athletics competition. My younger son, Miles, he's more the thinker. He's very thoughtful. He's very patient. He'll sit and put together Legos for hours. And he understands, he's like, oh, I'm not going to do that because that's not good for me, or I need to do this. And he kind of puts a process together. So they both have different aspects of me. And I'm trying to foster, things that they're passionate about, but also I teach them to question authority. I teach them to ask questions, think about different things. And my older son really likes to ride. He wants to start racing bicycles, and I'm kind of holding them off a little bit. I know how hard that is. But then one of the things we do when it comes to money, for instance, we were down in Charleston, South Carolina last week, and we have an acquisition that we're about to close on down there. We drive over there, and they know we start to get close. And I said, all right, boys, put down the books or the iPads, stop the music. And I said, start looking around, like, tell me what you see. And like, why is like, and my younger son, he's like, oh, there's like a Best Buy, or, oh, there's a Whole Foods, and this is a good area because of this and that. And I'm like, okay, tell me why else this is a good or a poor area to, to invest. And then we drive on the property, we get out, we walk the property, they understand. And my older son's like, I want to be an investor like you, Dad. I'm like, well, how are you going to get money to do that? And, we start that unfolds all these questions. So hopefully I can, provide some of that nurture, that nurture to kind of encourage them to move in a path while letting them find something that they're truly passionate about.
Yeah, I love it. It's interesting too, because most of our listeners know that like I have two daughters that are almost identical in age. I have an 8 and an 11-year-old. And it's crazy to see how much different two children can be, right? So and my kids are very similar, very different. And I love seeing the dichotomy. We had very similar kind of upbringings too. I grew up on a construction site. So my dad was a general contractor. So I was a blue collar hard worker. The funny thing is, I recall thinking I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I kept like waiting for it to be my time, if that makes any sense, right? I worked and I always worked, and like I was washing dishes when I was 15, but like I remember being 15, I had the Carlton Sheets 3-ring binder, right? With the cassette decks in it and all that.
Absolutely.
And my dad would be like, what is that? What are you doing with that? And like, meanwhile,
15, like, you were 15 with that? Wow. 15. That's pretty cool.
15 with that. And like I would listen to big set decks, and my dad, who owned rental properties at that point, would be like, what are you doing with that thing? But meanwhile, I kept thinking like one day. And if I look back, I wish that, maybe I had done stuff. I don't wish I'd done it differently, because I like the progression that I made. I think everything happens for a reason, but it's funny. I listened to these guys that when they were 12 and 13 had these like entrepreneurial ideas. I just tried to work my butt off. I never thought I could like do something bigger than what I was doing, at the time. So it's interesting to hear everybody's different journey along the way.
Yeah. Now I remember, that's a part I left out. Like, man, I remember July shoveling shingles off a hot roof and laying tongue and groove flooring and all these things. And same thing, growing up in a blue collar neighborhood. I mean, getting beat up on the way home from school. You're like, okay, it's like, I don't really want to do these things when I get older. And I don't want to be that. And you look around and you start to pick up little things. And again, I'm thankful for those experiences, because they have an imprint on you. And fortunately, you've had the opportunities to move beyond that.
Yeah. I'll probably take a ration of crap for this, but not that anyone needs to get bullied over a long period of time, but I don't think that a fist fight here and there is the end of the world. I think getting punched in the face every once in a while, is probably decent for us. I think it's important, especially as kids, that I think we're eliminating that from society, which is like a real problem. You know what I mean?
No, I agree with you, Joe. And if you get some shit for that comment, excuse my language, I'll take some of it too. Because I think, what I've noticed is, I think the earlier in life we experience hardship, the easier life is after that.
Completely.
And I was listening to, I thought it was one of the best interviews Joe Rogan's done with the founder of Black Rifle Coffee Company. And you have to listen to it. I don't know if anybody's listening, they like or not like Evan Hafer, but, talking about, Joe was talking about how there's a large portion of society today that has never endured any hardship or, any real challenge in life. And I think you can experience that different areas. You can experience that in sports. You can suffer on a bicycle. You can get, beat up on the way home from school. There's a lot of different things. And if you're listening, you're probably shaking your head thinking like there's some bad things that a lot of people have gone through. Yeah. But as humans, we're capable of getting through those things. And it's not always the best thing to shield our children from every single thing out there, totally. In my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're not keeping score until they're 12 years old. I'm a massive against that, rally against that. Yeah. There's a lot of things. The one analogy I use is my 8-year-old, from the time she was born until she was 4 years old, she was constantly sick. And it took us 3 years to realize that because she had early developmental issues with speaking. She actually didn't really speak until she was like 3 years old. Now we can't get her to stop talking. But she would constantly develop these urinary tract infections, and they would show up looking like flu symptoms. And so she would constantly be sick, and we couldn't figure out why. Well, it turns out she had a bad kidney. And so this
Wow.
kid was sick 9 months out of the year for 4 years,
Oh,
and
yeah.
eventually had her kidney removed. And
Wow.
now she is like the most resilient and sweetest, and like, she's almost bulletproof. Like, she can be in any scene, she can deal with stuff. And it's because
Yeah.
she was in hospitals and doctors' offices and
Mm.
needles and this and that, and had just so many things done to her when she was such a young age. And I look at that and I think, man, most of us, I'm 40 years old and I haven't gone through as much as this kid, knock on wood, has gone
Yeah.
through before she was 4.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
And, I know trust me, there's kids that have gone through way, way worse than that. I'm not comparing things like, I'm not comparing apples to apples here, but, that adversity, I believe, is really at times, it's such a defining character, defining moment for some people. Just like getting into a fist fight or losing a
yeah.
soccer game and coming back and having to learn how to win. I think it's
Yeah.
very, very important as far as
Yeah.
us defining who we are as people and and
Yeah.
and, and going forward.
No, it's so important. My son, older son, they're both lacrosse players, but my older son, they went to the championship game in this tournament, the last tournament they played in the spring, and they got beat. They got beat pretty badly, and he was just like, he's really disappointed. And I told my wife, I'm like, this is good. Like it. I think it was good that it happened when it did, instead of to kind of see that
Yeah.
early success. Because I'll tell you what, Joe, uh, I remember all the early losses. I
Yeah.
remember, getting beat at a game, losing a race, or what it was. I remember those actually a lot more than the wins. And the one that
Yeah.
sticks out, I lost this Pinewood Derby because we didn't put graphite on the axle, and I was so upset. And I just remember those little things, and it just
Yeah.
drove me. And then you push and you push and you push, versus you win early, and then it's like, maybe it doesn't mean as much when you get those wins. So it's a complicated topic, but it sounds like we're on the same side
Yeah.
of the opinion when it comes to that.
Yeah. So talk about maybe some big wins that you have going on right now in the business, and what you guys have experienced recently. You're in the multifamily syndicated space. You
Yeah.
guys have taken down probably some pretty incredible deals, I would assume, in the last couple of years. You've been doing it for a while. I mean, what's it look like? What do you see as the landscape of that business right now? It's getting too saturated. Are there some good deals out there? Obviously, I don't know if you could talk about the Charleston deal. I don't know if it closed yet or not, or where you're at with that, but
Yeah, it'll
what's it
probably be
look like?
closed by the time this airs.
Mhm.
So, a big thing for me, I left the corporate world after 18 years in the med device industry about 6 months ago, little, kind of at the beginning of this year, 2021. Um, and just to devote all my time with next level income and doing that. We got to a point where we had enough passive income coming in that didn't need to do that anymore. And there were some other little life things that we wanted to check the box on. But as far as the syndication space, last year was tough. We did a couple deals, and then we had a big gap. As the election came, the new year ticked over, and there was kind of a real lull. We've had a really good year, a lot of great acquisitions. Really excited about the Charleston deal in particular. It's an $86 million property that we're buying,
Nice.
350 unit deal. Yeah, it's 2018, 2019 vintage, but where it is in the market, it needs about $6,000 a door is what we're putting into it in terms of, finishes. We're going to redo the kitchens, the finishes, the flooring, that sort of thing. Beautiful property, beautiful exteriors, but when it was planned 5 years ago, they kind of missed out on that. So we've been really fortunate. I work with a terrific team. We have a great acquisitions team that works. We have a great financial team that puts lending and does the underwriting. Actually, my partner that handles that side is down there in Charleston, so he knows that market really well. First multifamily deal I did back in 2014 was in Charleston as well as an LP, so I have a little bit of a soft spot in my heart. But when it comes to what we're seeing in the market today, Joe, you could buy almost anything between 2010 and 2015 and just make money
Mm-hmm.
hand over fist. Almost, I say, because I've seen some not so great deals around that same time period as well. Things have become more and more competitive. Cap rates have compressed. We have at least 2-3 times as many LOIs, offers that are going out to get a single property today. So, I mean, like right now, I think we have a half a dozen LOIs out, and we may or may not get any deals from that going into the latter half of the year. So, we stick to our pricing. We stick to what we think is going to work in those markets. And when we get a deal, we know it's a good deal and it's going to work for investors. We're very fortunate. I think, I feel very fortunate. My investor base has doubled, in the course of the past year or so. I think my story, leaving the corporate world, a lot of people kind of were like, oh, this is like a real thing, that you got going on here. And it's funny because the question I've gotten a lot over the years, Joe, is, well, when did you start doing real estate? And I said, well, I was doing this way before I was doing med device sales. So
Sure.
I started my first my first official role in med device, I think I was 27. And I bought my first property at 21. So I already had six or so properties by the time I even became, a professional out there. So, that was kind of the plan all along. So where the future goes, we're going to continue to grow the portfolio. We're at about $500 million of assets under management. The team we've built is well equipped to handle twice that, 3 times that. And one of the things that we've done, we just launched a self-storage fund. So we recognize the value. I mean, I think you're in a terrific niche because, one of the differences with multifamily versus self-storage is about 2/3, 3/4 of multifamily, even 80+% in certain segments are managed by institutions, large players in the market. There's still a lot of mom and pops in self-storage. There's still a lot of inefficiencies that are there. So that's why it's so competitive. We have some strategies that work really well in the B plus, class A, even luxury properties that we purchase, but you have to execute on a very tight timeline. You have to be very precise with what you do. There's just not a lot of wiggle room when it comes to things. So we're buying higher quality assets, with higher income residents that are in there. And that's been the strategy that we've moved into from basically affordable or workforce housing where we started over 5 years ago.
And would you say people who are just getting into the syndicated space at this level, if you had to kind of start from today, do you think you still have to be in that C-class workforce housing to get started at this point to keep yourself in the competitive space? Is that kind of where you have to start?
That's a good question. I think, it's even harder in the C and B minus asset class, the 70s, 80s vintage properties today, because cap rates have compressed so much that I just personally, I don't think you're compensated for the risk in those properties because you can pay 50 less basis points. So on a cap rate. So let's say you're getting a 5.5% cap rate on a C class property, and we're paying 4.5 or 5% in a B plus or A class property. I just don't think that makes sense to do that. I think if you're getting into that space, you need to find an area that you have some sort of unique ability or some sort of competitive advantage. If you're just bidding on the same, 1980, 1985, value add property as everybody else, somebody out there is probably willing to pay more money than you. And we're seeing a lot of that. So I think it may even be worth looking at other areas in the market. I think senior housing is one that is not looked at enough today. I think we're going into a real crisis over the next 10 years when it comes to that. I tell new investors, so if you're listening and you're like, where do I start? I was just talking to a new investor yesterday, a young guy. I said, hey, look, fix and flip, like buy a house, move into it, flip it, or Airbnb, short-term rentals. So if you can buy a house and rent out your basement or, put an apartment over your garage, I mean, I know many, many people that are making 5 figures a month with not that many properties and paying all of their expenses in short-term rentals. So, don't be afraid to look at other areas and potentially, pivot a little bit from those. And I'm agnostic when it comes to opportunities out there. I love multifamily, ton of money of my own money in multifamily, lots of the deals that we do, but I think there's a lot of opportunities in other areas too.
Love it, man. All right. So last question for you. What would you say is the best advice that you've ever gotten? We all have mentors. What's the best thing you ever heard in business, life in general? What's the best advice you ever got?
Yeah. And probably advice that I didn't take. So Ray Alcorn, he wrote one of the books on commercial real estate. He told me, I sat down with him when I was in college and he goes, go learn how to manage a property. And so I think, whatever you want to do, learn how to be the boots on the ground. What is it? Dirty jobs, you see the boss undercover. Like, I love that. Like you need to know what the people on the ground are experiencing and what they're doing before you move up the food chain. So learn by doing. If you want to be a leader, you need to learn by doing first.
Such good advice, man. We develop self-storage opportunities now, and there's no way that I would have the confidence and the ability to move forward and take investors' money and do what we do if I hadn't started out hanging drywall and sleeping floors. 30 years
Yeah.
ago. Like there's just no way. So yeah.
No, it makes such a difference. And there's not a lot of people that can straddle that, Joe, like what it's like, if you can do that, if you understand how to swing a hammer and you understand how to talk to an investor who's willing to put $1 million into one of your opportunities, I think that's a fairly unique skill set.
Yeah. Fantastic. Cool. What did I miss? What did I forget to ask?
If I didn't mention it, I told you at the beginning, I tell you how to get a copy of my book. So Next Level Income. It's a nice quick read. You could read it on a flight, read it in a weekend. We also have an audio book. If you go to nextlevelincome.com, click on the book link, you can get a free copy. I'll even send you one if you put your address in.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to put the link in the show notes. Chris Larsen, thanks for joining us, man. Great interview. Tons of value. I know the listeners are going to get a lot out of this episode. As always, guys, if you do, make sure you leave us a 5-star review. Make sure you share it. Tag Chris and I in any shares that you guys put on your social media wall. Where do they find you on social media, Chris?
Do a lot on LinkedIn. We're on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. Not big on Twitter yet, but you can find us out there. Just search for me, Chris Larsen with an E, nextlevelincome.com.
Cool. We'll make sure we tag you there as well in the show notes. Chris, thanks again for joining us, brother. Appreciate you being on.
Joe, it's been great.